Hello everyone, we are going to talk about interview today, and this will be the first part of lecture content on interview. We will talk about it for 2 weeks. Before we start, I want to talk about the research process in general first. Before you start the research, of course, you need to select topic, and it's not so easy to select a good, relevant, important topic for research. First, you need to ask yourself, can the problem be investigated? If it's something so philosophical or it's all about personal belief, you can't really find objective way to investigate it, then you probably shouldn't use that topic for scientific research. And you also need to ask yourself whether your research would harm the subjects. Let's say if we want to know whether watching violent media would affect people's behavior, and we want to lock them up in the room for weeks, and they can only watch violent media, and we will see if their behavior changed. But we can't really do that because it's unethical to hurt people just for some research. And also you need to ask yourself, can the data be analyzed? You need to have enough people get you enough data, and you need to have access to data. If you want to study chimpanzee, you got to be ready to go to some really far away places to see them, to collect data from chimpanzees. If you want to study something that only happens in, let's say, Africa, then you have to go there. Do you have enough money? Can you really go there? Do you have access to those group of people or group of animal you are interested in? So really that will affect whether your research is doable. And also, you need to think about, is the problem significant? Some of you may be interested in the effect of TV has on pets. It may be interesting, and it can be fun to do a project like this. But if you want to publish your research later or apply a grant for it, you really need to study some problem that's significant to human being. You're more likely to get grant from there, or some animal that's really important to certain ecosystem. There are a lot of ways to go about it, but spend some time on thinking whether the problem is significant would definitely be worth it. And also, can the results be generalized? You don't want to study something that's so specific and the result is irrelevant to anyone else outside of the group. So I got my PhD from Washington State University. So if I did a research there and my result cannot be generalized to other university, cannot be generalized to students at SFA, then my topic may not be as relevant when I want to publish it on the national journal. I may have to limit my journal options to local ones. And also how much time you have, how much money you have. You need to consider that. Some research will cost years, sometimes decades to finish. And some kind of data is free. You can get it online, do secondary research. A lot of government agencies collect data regularly and you do research that way. But if you want to get data yourself, let's say interviewing people, collecting data through survey or experiments, you really need to consider how much you want to pay your subjects and whether you have the money before your research starts. Once you have a relevant topic in mind, you need to start to do a literature review, because science is not something you just imagined. You have to build on previous research, so you need to know what has been done before. And then you develop your questions. There are two types of questions. The first we call it a hypothesis. It's a statement of testable, expected relationship between two concepts. Let's say we hypothesize that individuals who watch more TV see the world as a scary place. So you see, when TV viewing goes up, the scale, how scary the world is, how people rate how scary a world is, then their rating on the scale will go up as well. So that's a hypothesis. And there is research question. When the researcher is unsure of a relationship between two concepts, they usually use research question. So when we're doing quantitative research, hypothesis will be used more frequently. When we're doing qualitative research, especially interview, we usually propose research question. I will discuss that more later. Usually we propose research question because there is no theory or prior research to make a prediction. We don't know. Let's say if we're doing a research on social media and how people connect with their friend, we don't know if you use more social media necessarily means you feel more connected to your friends. It also happens when previous research showed mixed results, so you don't want to predict a direction. That's why you propose a research question. And also, that I have example here, is there a relationship between social media use and the exercise? Some people say there is, some people say there isn't. After you have done your literature review and then you decided, okay, maybe it's safer for me to just propose the question rather than predict a direction that I'm not confident in. And when you develop a research question, you don't want to be too broad. Sometimes people ask questions that are just too big to answer. Let's say, what predicts racism? There may be a million things that predict racism, and you don't have the time or the money to cover all of them in one single research project. That's why you need to narrow it down. And because we're in communication major, mass comm major, you need to ask questions that relate to our field as well. And you also need to understand that you may have some underlying assumptions before you answer the question. You want to be as objective as possible. Let's say if you see a research question, why are men more successful than women? You see the underlying assumption is men are more successful, and then you ask why. It might be true, but be more careful if you're asking why female students do better than male students. You're not sure that's the truth. So before you ask why, make sure you understand the fact. Maybe you ask whether gender would affect academic achievement. That would be a more objective way to propose this question. And also make sure you're only asking one question at a time. You don't want to overload your viewers and confuse them or even confuse yourself. So one question at a time. And there are some questions we already have an answer in the academic field. There's so many papers on it already. So when you're doing your literature review, you need to keep that in mind. If you feel like your question has already been answered, for instance, does TV affect attitudes? We know it does. The more TV ad you watch, maybe you will like a product more. So you want to propose it in a different way and make sure you provide some new insights with your research. And please avoid what-if questions. This is very important for scientific research, especially social science. We do not ask what-if question. We ask what factors are important. Let's say, if you want to know, would ICFA have better sports teams if it were in Houston? This is not a question you can answer objectively with research. Instead, you can ask whether location of university to affect their sports teams performance in general. That's something you can answer because you can compare schools in small towns and school in university and see how their sports team compete with each other. But you cannot just imagine what would happen if SFA is a different location, because there's so many things would change and you can't really measure them objectively. And we also do not ask should questions in social science. You don't imply that something should happen. Let's say, of course, most of us believe people should stop smoking, but scientific research cannot tell people what they should do. They can present all the evidence for people, like how smoking can affect your health, why is it bad, why it is related to cancer, and you have to let people to decide whether they should stop or not. So you provide the evidence, do not propose a should question. Leave that to philosophers. And once you have the questions, you can design a study. You can either use quantitative research. We covered that a little bit in last week and the week before that, why it's different from qualitative research. which is our focus this week. So there's survey, experiment, content analysis you can use. We will cover quantitative research after spring break. Cover quantitative research in detail after spring break. We will start introducing quantitative research method in general before spring break. And of course, there are different qualitative research methods you can use. Focus group, which is used very frequently by PR advertising firms or marketing firms. Interviews, which is the method we're going to cover this week. There are case studies, observations, and of course, we will talk about all of them. And those two approaches make very different assumptions. If you don't remember, please go back to the older slides and the older lecture content. Make sure you understand they're really different. Once you design your study, you can collect your data and you can analyze and interpret the data and write a paper to inform others, let other people know what you have done. Remember, scientific research should be public, so other people can learn from your study or even learn from your mistake and do better research in the future. And then you can select a new topic, start this process again. Eventually, you want to develop a theory. And if you're doing qualitative research, you want to develop a theory. If you're doing quantitative research, you want to use theory to guide your research process. Either way, theory is very important for scientific research. And this week, we're going to talk about interview. We're not going to go into details, but I do want to start on some basic information about interview. First, what is interview? It's a qualitative research method that seeks to describe the meaning of life, basically. We believe that people have their own interpretation of truth, of reality, their own understanding of life. We want to develop a rich understanding of people, how they see life, how they see events in their life. And we want to cover both factual and a meaning level, which means we need to ask things that's more objective, like who they are, what's their age, what's their income level, what's their relationship status is like, but we also want to ask their interpretation of their life as well. So you can see it's going to be more difficult to interview on a meaning level because factual questions can be easy to answer, but meaning level, when you ask questions on meaning level, you need people to interpret what's going on, and you need to interpret the result as well. And this is a research method that's really useful for getting the story behind a participant's experience. I have a friend who is doing research on 9/11, and he did a lot of interviews with people who were there or who had family members experience that tragedy event, and he wants to understand what happened and how they deal with that. And it's really hard to do, but it's a really useful way to understand people's unique experiences. A few things to remember before we have to go today. Interviews are completed by interviewers based on what the respondents say, and it's a far more personal form of research than survey questionnaires. And in a personal interview, the interviewers work directly with the person. Of course, you can do other types of interviews through the phone, so you don't deal with people face to face. And unlike surveys, interviewers, you can ask follow-up questions or probe people to tell you more or lead people to a certain direction. You have more freedom. And interviews are easier, to be honest, because face-to-face conversation gave respondent the chance to ask questions as well. If they don't understand some question, they can ask for explanation. And of course, there are pros and cons. It's very time-consuming, and it can cost a lot of money and a lot of time. In the last point, I would say is the most important here. Remember, the interviewers, the scholar who is conducting the interview, is considered a part of the measurement instrument, and the interviewers has to be well trained to know how to respond to questions and how to ask questions and how to design interview questions in general. And we'll go into details next week. Thank you. That's all for today. I hope you have a good week.